Okay, before I start, I want you to put me under lie detection as I speak, because I feel like what I'm saying is going to be used in court. The question that I'm being asked is, did I ever believe that there was any point in Brent Spiner's life where he wanted Loree McBride? And I can answer unequivocally, never, not for a second. So then the question is, how can you be so sure? Because of who I am and who the real Brent Spiner is. You see, I'm a very unusual person, and so is Brent. And so it's not easy for most people, for the common everyday people, to understand us because Brent and I are not common everyday people. When I grew up, I felt unstable. My father left my mother, or at least that's what she told us, when I was 3. So I grew up without a father, and I was determined that if I ever married, I wanted to have a marriage that was a lot more solid than the house, the family that I grew up in. Um, Even though I went to my paternal grandparents' home every summer, and that was pretty solid, I wasn't totally impressed with my grandfather because he could get eccentric and crazy at times. So I was determined that if I married, I would only marry a man with moral standards like Jesus Christ. And if I couldn't find a man like that, I would be single for the rest of my life because I was determined that I would never, ever divorce. I wanted to be in a rock solid marriage if I married. And to ensure that this would happen, I did want to marry. I mean, I wanted to have that rock solid man, but I knew that I would have to be a very unusual, virtuous woman to qualify for a rock solid husband. And I came to the conclusion as a young woman looking at the world around me that the only way I could get this rock solid marriage was I would have to divorce myself from the world, separate from the world, and associate with people of very high moral standards who were not like the modern world around me, which I really despised. And I despised my mother's moral standards because she wasn't a Christian, and I felt, and she worked as a model. And I actually did not respect her for that. I wish that she was more old fashioned, less of a woman's liber type. So I kind of rebelled against her because I felt that was the only way that I could find that rock solid man that I was looking for. I wanted a man who would never leave me like my father left my mother. So when I found the Lord, that was the beginning of my journey to find that rock solid man. And I was taught in church that if you wanted to have a solid marriage, you needed to marry another Christian, another believer. So I actually set up a list of what I was looking for, and my standards were very high. I wanted him to be a virgin. I wanted him to save himself for me. He must not drink. He must not smoke. He had to go to church all the time. He had to be a born again Christian. He had to be separated from the world. He didn't listen to rock music. He was clean. I had no premarital sex. I was determined to be a virgin. I wanted my husband to be a virgin. I wanted him to save himself for me. I believe that if you were promiscuous as a young person, that meant you would be promiscuous after marriage. So that's why I was like that. I didn't want to end up with somebody like my father who would leave me, even though he was a retired airline pilot and made a lot of money. That didn't impress me. Money didn't impress me because I grew up in a home where my father was rich. Airline pilots made good money. I wanted somebody who was dependable. So I actually became a really hardcore Christian, and I wanted a hardcore husband. And for that reason, I didn't really date a lot. And I did one time date a liberal Jewish guy, but then I felt so guilty about it. I thought, oh, you got weak, Gail. You got to get back to your hardcore ways. So that didn't last very long. I kind of backslid a bit. And then I got really hardcore again. And I got involved in an independent fundamental Baptist church that taught that rock music was wrong. It even went so far as to say that a woman needed to be feminine and womanly. And I liked that because I felt like the only way I could get a solid man is he'd have to be masculine, dependable, with steel and velvet. So I actually wanted a husband like Jesus Christ. I figured if I got somebody like that, he would be dependable. He wouldn't leave me. He would love me and I'd be married to him forever and we'd have a happy marriage. So even though the main reason I went to the state university was to save money because my family wouldn't support me going to a Christian school. And I couldn't see how I could afford it unless I got a degree in something like nursing. So I went to Florida State University to get like a bachelor's degree in nursing. I was hoping then I could use that to pay my way through Bible college. I always planned to go to Bible college, and that's where I planned to find my rock solid husband. So I ended up graduating with honors from FSU, and I did go to the Bible college. When I was there, I did start noticing that my high intelligence seemed to be a problem with a lot of these rock solid guys that I liked. I really admired the guys, and I felt like if I married one of them, they'd make me a good husband. But my high intelligence was a bit of a problem with the hardcore group that I hung around with that felt that a woman shouldn't wear pants and rock music was wrong and drink, And at the school I went to, your dates were chaperoned. So, but I liked that because I figured this is where I was going to find my rock solid guy. And none of the guys that I felt would be compatible with me were interested in me when I was attending this school. And I think it was because I may have been a little too hardcore and inflexible. You see, to overcompensate for the insecurity I felt by growing up in a home where my father left me, I became super rigid. And I think it turned off a lot of guys that now I'm not that way. The Lord actually had to put me into a marriage with somebody that I thought was hardcore to get me to lose some of that rigidity. So I married a guy who met my list. Unfortunately, I was very trusting, very honest, and I never lied about anything. In fact, I worked for some lawyers as a legal secretary, and one of the lawyers asked me to lie. And I said, I'm sorry, but as a Christian, I can't do that. I said, I would rather lose my job than lie for you. And the law firm was kind of in a quandary. They were pissed at me, but they finally decided, you know what? It is kind of good to have a worker who has high morals. So we'll just give her to another lawyer who won't ask her to lie. So they transferred me to another lawyer. And I kept my job there, though I didn't like that job. I was working for IRS attorneys. Imagine me not wanting to lie and working for IRS attorneys. So I wasn't happy there. And as soon as I got married and I didn't have to work anymore, I quit that job. I didn't like it. I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, and I figured I got my solid guy now. And the first year of the marriage was pretty good. And my husband was a big church goer, and I was very impressed because during the dating time, I didn't let him hold my hand or kiss me or anything, and he still married me. So I thought, wow, I got a solid guy. I didn't realize he was a secret pedophile. And the reason his dating standards were so high, and he said he was a virgin when he married me, which was kind of a lie because he actually had sex with boys. But anyways, the Lord used that marriage to show me that hardcore is not the way to go if you're looking for a happy marriage. And you can't just make a list of what a person should be like because nobody really fits a list. We all grow and evolve and change. So I was lonely in that marriage, and my husband didn't love me, which I wouldn't admit to myself because it would mean that I failed in my goal to get a solid marriage. And I had prayed every day that I would only marry in God's will and that God would break it up if it wasn't his will, and God let me marry this guy. I realize now that I needed to go into that marriage to lose some of my rigidity. So I started writing Brent Spiner because I saw him in Star Trek The Next Generation portraying Data in a role where he was very velvety and soft and compassionate. the total opposite of my rigid husband, who wouldn't let me miss any church service. And I opened up to him like a brother, or like the dream husband that I knew didn't exist, but I wished existed, which made me feel happy to write him. Because you see, my husband was all steel, but he didn't have any velvet. Whereas Brent Spiner seemed loaded with velvet. I wasn't sure about the steel, but he seemed to have some of that too. So I took, and what was funny is right after I started writing him, my son got into my prescription meds, and he got into my, and then the state started harassing me. And I thought they were going to take my son from me. I was so naive and trusting. I actually gave them permission to educate me. I signed a paper, which I never should have done. And I felt so isolated. My husband didn't even understand the stress I was under. They would call me up and say, we're coming over to your home in a half an hour to help educate you about your child. This happened like 1 year after the accident. I learned my lesson from the accident. I made sure to lock up all the meds. They wanted me to go to parenting classes, everything. So I wrote Brent and I said, I'm so stressed out. I'm going to get an ulcer from this. I'm so worried I'm going to lose my son. And when Brent Spiner, I didn't know if he was reading my mail, but Richard Arnold, who I was writing, said that he was behind the episode, The Drumhead. I could tell he was behind it. I thought, I can't believe it. This guy who's like my dream husband, the fact that he was a Hollywood star meant that I would never, ever consider him for marriage. Hollywood stars, I was told, were part of the Hollywood cesspool, not dependable for husbands. They divorced 2 or 3 times. I mean, so it was obvious I wasn't romantically going after him. I just wanted a friend. And a Hollywood star I figured would be safe because they'd never want some religious fanatic like me from a very strict Baptist background. I mean, I went to a church that felt that the Southern Baptists were liberal, okay? So that's the kind of background I was from. They were really, really strict. It was like if you went to a Southern Baptist church, they thought you were evil. That's what the kind of church I was going to. But I felt like this is where I'd find my solid guy because the rules were so strict. So when Brent did that, I thought, wow, here my husband was laughing at me. I was about to get an ulcer. I was worried about losing my son. And Brent actually went to the trouble to have Star Trek make an episode to honor me, The Drumhead. After that, I had so much respect for him. I said, he's not getting anything out of this. And he actually likes a woman who's a Christian. I never expected this from liberal Hollywood. Well, but I still figured, yeah, but he's still a Hollywood star. And then I started getting phone calls when we moved to Seattle after I escaped from Florida and I didn't have to worry about the HRS anymore. And Brent was making love to me on the phone. I figured it out when I got his music album, which I never planned on getting because I thought it would be sinful rock music. And I listened to that and I thought, wow, this guy, he's like a Bible Belt, steel and velvet guy. And I love his Texas drawl. I was very impressed with Texas men because they seem like the most solid men in the world to me. And so you might say, how do you know he never wanted Loree McBride? Because Loree McBride is not the kind of a girl that a solid Texas guy like Brent Spiner would want. When I listened to his music album, Old Yellow Eyes Is Back, I knew he was solid. You see, Loree actually called me on the phone a couple times and she would say, hey, bitch, what the fuck are you doing with my boyfriend? I thought, wow, that woman's a crazy. Brent would never want her. And I figured it was some crazy WACKO who worked at Paramount Studios, some low-lying employee who maybe was a liberal crazy at Hollywood and was just calling me up and trying to intimidate me from writing I figured maybe Paramount hired the nut. I was close, but Brent would never want her. She was too crazy. He's a solid guy and he wanted a solid girl. Loree McBride is not solid. She's a total crazy idiot. She's a crazy killer.